Right, do we think we're ready to get started? Do we have anybody who's waiting to get in? Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so do we have anyone who's waiting to get in? All right, I'm gonna take that as no. We'll go ahead and get started. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us tonight. I'm Amy Mante. I'm the Deputy Director for the Department of Planning and the Master Plan Coordinator. We do have some agency representatives here with us tonight, and I don't know if I've captured everyone, but I do see folks here from Rec and Parks, from Environmental Protection, Aging, the Department of Public Works, and Economic Development. I believe we also have, I think, at least 3 planning board members, which there may be some more since last I checked. And it looks like a representative from at least one of the council offices. So thank you all for joining us as well tonight as observers. So you want to go to the next slide, please, Emery? So welcome. Oops, go back. Welcome to the first of 7 input meetings we're holding in January and February. The first meeting was last week where we discussed regionalism. This is actually our second meeting. Tonight, we'll give you a brief overview of the input we gathered in phase 1. So if you joined us this summer, some of that will sound familiar. Then we'll present our draft goals for the Livable Built Environment Part 1. This is a really broad topic, so we've split it into 2 sections. Tonight, we're looking at housing and land use. And then we'll have an opportunity for you to give us input on our draft goals and actions. Master Plan 2030, as you know, is underway. Through the summer and fall of 2021, the Department of Planning conducted a series of community engagement meetings that were held in different communities throughout the county. That input was gathered and will guide the vision for the county over the next 10 years. We held 50 community engagement meetings. Over the course of those meetings, we engaged with over 1,000 citizens of Baltimore County and captured about 4,000 comments related to where people see their communities and the county evolving over the next 10 years. The meetings were held across all 7 council districts and engaged over 35 various community groups. We all asked broad questions about what you valued most or wanted to see changed in your communities. And we also asked where you see the county in the next 10 years. From the input we gathered during those meetings, the top 3 most discussed categories were land use, economic development, and transportation. And just to note, the most engaged groups were located in the western part of the county, Catonsville, Randallstown, and Woodlawn. Also interesting to note, residents expressed the most support for walkability and pedestrian-oriented infrastructure, streetscape improvements, renovated schools and other public facilities, green space and parks, redeveloping aging commercial corridors, senior housing and facilities, stormwater, small businesses and local businesses, support for those, and community engagement and participatory planning. Most concern related to school overcrowding, traffic and congestion, overdevelopment, loss of green space, continued threat of climate change, lack of professional and recreational opportunities for young people, and blight and stagnancy in older communities. Now, as we're moving to phase 2, we're doing work internally, not only to review everything that we heard from the community in the past few months, but also review existing conditions and emerging trends to determine the big ideas for moving the county forward to where we want to be by 2030. At the heart of this process is the idea that local government should invest more and more thoughtfully in its people and infrastructure. Using what we heard in the summer and fall, we've developed draft goals for each of our 6 master plan topics. Over the next few weeks, as I mentioned, we're asking for your input on these goals and your assistance in suggesting actions to achieve these goals. The goals have been grouped into 6 categories: livable built environment, which we're discussing tonight, resilient economy, interwoven equity, healthy communities, harmony with nature, and responsible regionalism. Each of these groups is led by a community planner with staff support from within the department. So very briefly, before we discuss and get your input on livable built environment, I want to provide an overview on all the input we gathered this summer and fall. So as you can see here, for livable built environment, we heard a lot about trash collection and recycling, code enforcement, ADA compliance, maintenance of public facilities, a need for affordable senior housing throughout the county, and a support for a variety of types of housing, including higher density residential. There was a strong emphasis on stormwater and sewer infrastructure, road paving, as well as expanding high-speed internet in the rural areas. Concerns about traffic and congestion, as well as improvements for specific intersections and traffic corridors for improved safety. And then we heard about the need to reform the comprehensive zoning map process and enforcing or strengthening the urban-rural demarcation line. We also heard concerns about the need for more transparency in the development process, including updates or changes to the plan unit development process. For a resilient economy, we heard about commercial centers improving and diversifying retail options and redeveloping large shopping mall properties that may be vacant. Retrofitting retail corridors and to look at them less auto-centric and how they can integrate into the communities that surround them. Adaptive reuse for vacant or obsolete properties, as well as possible grants to help for facade improvements and streetscape improvement. The county needing to be able to attract large-scale job creators in new and emerging industries. Opportunity to support agritourism and equine industries in the county, and workforce development that meets the needs of those emerging industries that for interwoven equity, the need to address underserved and vulnerable populations as far as equity in providing housing, services, health, safety, expansion of public venues in the world of arts and culture, more performance and gathering spaces. There were a lot of comments about community coordination. Residents wanted to have an opportunity to hear more from the county and to be their input to be taken into account in better ways or to have better participation. Public-private partnerships between institutions and community groups. And again, back to communications between the county and the citizens, maybe a more user-friendly website and those types of things. And we also heard about historic preservation, looking at the county's heritage and making sure that the county's heritage, the treatment of the county's heritage is equitable and includes all residents. For healthy community, we heard about health and wellness for senior citizens and young people specifically. At least that's what we heard the most of, to ensure that communities remain walkable and allow people to age in place. Public safety, as I mentioned, we met with community groups, so a lot of the comments we got about public safety weren't necessarily county-wide, but more specific to the groups we were talking to. So, you know, we heard a lot about less crime and more safety measures, improved communication with the police department, renewed focus on pedestrian safety and speeding, and those types of things. For harmony with nature, we heard about the shoreline. The county's waterfront should have more public access, as well as protections from flooding and erosion. Reforestation, tree preservation, tree canopy were very popular topics with the communities, as well as impacts to infrastructure and the environment in response to climate change. There was also a lot of input from almost everyone expressing a desire for improvements to the quantity and quality of parks and recreation opportunities in the county, as well as walkability, bikeability, parks, ball fields, greenways, all kinds of ways to be connected to the natural world, whether you're in the urban area, suburban area, or rural. And for responsible regionalism, this was probably the topic we did not get a huge amount of input in those meetings, but you know, we did hear about the interconnectedness of nearby communities, not just within the county, but in neighboring jurisdictions. And you know, there's always the topic of Baltimore City and its relationship to the county, and how we can work together to look for solutions to problems that may exist or strengthen opportunities for partnerships with the city and other jurisdictions. So as I mentioned earlier, tonight is the second of our 7 meetings where we're asking for your input on draft goals and for your help in the development of actions. At this point, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Laurie Hay, who is the staff lead for the Livable Built Environment Work Group.
Thank you, Amy. Good evening, everybody. My name is Laurie Hay. I'm heading up the Livable Built Environment Work Group. And as Amy said before, it's a very broad topic, so we decided to divide it into 2 sections. The first section tonight, we will talk about land use and development and housing. And then on the 24th, we will talk about infrastructure, transportation, and public facilities. So just to review with you tonight, we're going to talk about some draft goals we've come up with and associated actions. And we're going to do that in more detail in breakout groups. But right now, I just wanted to read to you our draft goal on each of these topics. So for land use and development, the goal is to elevate the quality of the built environment to ensure an equitable, sustainable, and prosperous place for all citizens where communities thrive and cultivate their unique identities. For housing, the goal is to strengthen neighborhoods by providing quality housing that is accessible, affordable, and sustainable to meet the needs of the county's diverse population. So tonight you're going to be assigned to a WebEx breakout room. Each room will discuss the same topics, and then we'll come back to the lobby and report out to the entire group. The room will be managed by a planner who will be your facilitator, and will be asking you questions and recording the details of our discussion. When the session is over, you will get a notice and everyone will automatically be moved back to the main meeting room where we'll hear what everyone discussed. Sometimes when we break out into these rooms, people lose audio. If you see this when you enter or leave a breakout room, click connect to reconnect your computer's audio. And I think with that, we're going to break out into our individual breakout groups.
So Laurie, this is the people that stay in the main lobby with you.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so well, thank you for joining us this evening. This is, as I said, part 1 of the Livable Built Environment, and will include goals and actions on land use and development and housing. The second part will be on the 24th and will include transportation, infrastructure, and public facilities. So tonight we will review draft goals and actions for land use and housing. As we review them, we ask you to think about 3 things, basically. Do you generally agree with the direction of the goal? Do you generally agree with the direction of the actions? And what additional actions should be added? The draft goals and actions were developed by planning staff through input provided in phase 1 of the community engagement process, input from other county agencies, best practices, and reviewing the recent work of other jurisdictions. The list that we're going to show you is not in any way prioritized by order of importance, and it is by no means exhaustive. The action examples that you'll see are to get you thinking about the general direction we're going. And as you participate, we ask that you remember that this part of the community engagement is countywide. So we're asking you to be thinking countywide. We'll spend approximately 40 minutes doing this exercise, and then we'll come out to the back to the whole group to break out. So I think we have, for each section, land use and then housing, we have between 20 and 25 minutes to work on those goals. So if Crystal Patrick is helping me as recorder tonight, and she's very fast, but we might ask you to slow down if we need clarity on something. Okay, I think what I'll do first is to we're going to start with land use and development first, and I will read the goal and then I'll read the actions. They are numbered, so we ask you that when you comment on an action or question it, that you refer to it by number so we can get in the right place with your comments. Again, the numbers do not mean anything in terms of priority. They're just there for bookkeeping purposes. So the goal under land use and development is to elevate the quality of the built environment to ensure an equitable, sustainable, and prosperous place for all citizens where communities thrive and cultivate their unique identities. Number 1 is to create a redevelopment framework that is aligned with programmatic and financial resources. This would basically replace what is in Master Plan 2020 known as community enhancement areas. Number 2 is to evaluate and update the planned unit development process. Number 3 is to create overlay districts to establish 15-minute community nodes to provide greater walkability and proximity to retail and services. Number 4 is to utilize nature-based solutions for planning. Number 5 is to align water and sewer plans for updating with zoning. Number 6 is to alter the CZMP cycle, changing it from 4 years to 10 years in conjunction with the master plan update cycle. Number 7 is to support and provide resources for the adaptive reuse of buildings rather than demolition. Number 8 is to create conservation districts to preserve the character of older neighborhoods that do not qualify as historic districts. Number 9 is to implement strategies to address the negative impacts of climate change on residential and commercial properties, including increased temperatures, sea level rising, and non-tidal flooding. Number 10 is to develop small area plans for sections of the county after the master plan is adopted. And number 11 is to create a strategy and a plan for enhancing the potential redevelopment of older shopping centers, prioritizing those with greater socioeconomic viability. So again, this is not an exhaustive list. We're sure there are a lot more ideas out there, but why don't we start with the goal and hear what folks have to say about that? Any comments about the goal we've developed? Nothing. So we're asking if you generally agree with it. If not, why you don't, if there's anything that seems to be missing out of the goal statement.
This is Amy Menzer from Dundalk Renaissance. I support this goal wholeheartedly.
Great. Thank you. Okay, well, why don't we move to the actions then? This is the heart of the section. Do people have comments about any of the specific actions? You can do them in order. You can do them in order of interest. That's why we numbered them.
This is Gregory Friedman. I have, well, a few concerns. Changing the Czmp process from 4 years to 10 years strikes me as maybe a little problematic. I mean, I don't know the history or the legal reasoning behind it, why that is every 4 years. I mean, I mean, I've always just found it weird that you have to wait 4 years to rezone something. It just seems to me that that doing it every 4 years overwhelms the communities and developers and elected officials, and doing it every 10 years is just going to be crazy. And I know a lot of people complain about use of PUDs. Well, this is, I mean, they're going to explode because no one's going to be able to build anything through the regular rezoning process because they're only going to be able to do it every 10 years. So that makes me very worried. My other concern is you talk about the shopping centers, and I mean it does need it is a good thing to do, and I wholeheartedly support that. I'm wondering what you mean by prioritizing those with greater socioeconomic viability. I know in Baltimore City there are certain neighborhoods where you know, you have a situation where there's a housing market or something that is just completely and totally non-existent, and thankfully we don't have that here in Baltimore County. And and obviously when that happens, the city has to prioritize certain areas that are where you can sell someone a house. I wonder, like, again, what does that mean, and what does that mean for those areas that don't have great socioeconomic viability?
Actually, thank you very much for bringing this up, because as you're talking, I'm realizing that there is a typo there, and that is supposed to read vulnerability.
Oh, okay. That's all right. That makes it a lot. Okay, that makes it a all right. And I also just want to say on a similar note that I believe mixed use development should be part of that strategy, given that a lot of places say that the U.S. is over retailed. And we should and also I think that I don't see anything, maybe it's further down the list. I don't see anything about residential neighborhoods. At the last meeting, someone from Lansdowne was talking about how their homes were always they had how like they had vacant homes in their neighborhoods. And again, a place like Lansdowne, it might not have a super strong housing market, but there definitely is a housing market, and there definitely are people who would purchase homes there. And I'm wondering if like the county has any data on homes that are vacant, neighborhoods with the strongest vacant homes, and perhaps it's coming up with a solution on how to market those communities and get those vacant homes, whether they're in foreclosure or whatever, back on the market.
Yes, I think we will be addressing those under the next goal in the housing section, but as far as vacancies. But if you look at goal 8, one of the strategies that we're suggesting is to create conservation districts to preserve the character of older neighborhoods. So we're talking about neighborhoods that maybe aren't experiencing a great deal of decline, but they may be kind of on the tipping point, and they have kind of characteristics and historic characteristics that people in the neighborhood like, and they would like to preserve, but they don't want them to be historic districts. So this idea of conservation districts to preserve some of that character is one that was actually suggested by the person who heads up our landmarks preservation section. And we will get to vacant houses when we talk about the housing goal.
Hi, that action number 8 that you just mentioned, I'm afraid that there could be unintended consequences of it where folks might feel like they want to conserve their neighborhood, if you will, in an effort to, I guess, resist change for maybe more dense housing, or bike paths, or make it more pedestrian friendly. So there's a lot of, NIMBY, not in my backyard type of feelings that people tend to get. And I'm afraid number 8 could give these people an opportunity to resist positive change for the county.
Okay.
If I could piggyback off that, I mean, maybe it would be helpful to go into a little bit more what you're envisioning with these conservation districts. Because I mean, what does that mean? Does that mean there's going to be no infill development there? Does that mean that there's going to be housing density limits? Does that mean there's going to be limits on what kind of subdivisions can be built there on retail? So what, it's depending on how you structure it, it could be potentially very damaging to development.
Well, we want your input on how you think it could be structured to assist neighborhoods to kind of preserve their character. I think that's what they were really looking at. I definitely will take note of how your concerns with what it could do in terms of.
I have some of those concerns as well. This is Amy, that somehow there needs to be a way to acknowledge the character of the community while also understanding that places are dynamic by sort of, and communities are dynamic, and things are always changing to some degree. And so thinking about if things are going to change, how do you allow for that to happen? What's the on-ramp for that to occur in a way that is more palatable and sensitive to the existing community context? So it's not putting a 30-story skyscraper next to 2-story row homes, which probably wouldn't be marketable, wouldn't be viable anyway. But the point is there's some connection, there's some acknowledgement of that community context. But anyway, you get the point, I think.
Yeah, I think exactly that. And that's the word I think we were looking for too, was that we're looking to preserve the context in some of these neighborhoods that, again, they don't want to be necessarily or even qualified to be historic districts with strict, strict regulations, but they want to preserve things like some of the building standards in the community, and the walkability, the accessibility to retail, perhaps focusing more on redevelopment of structures than demolition and new construction. So this is the kind of thing that we were looking at with that particular goal.
It makes sense. As someone who lives in an old home outside of a historic district in southern Baltimore County, I get it. But I'm just afraid. I know some of my neighbors in Relay in their historic district. They'll pull that historic district card out every opportunity they get to resist change, even if it's for against their own best interests. So
okay, good.
I'm glad we're talking about this.
Yeah, we're talking about balancing, creating a balance so that it works as an incentive as opposed to a stick.
I mean, I know we're going to be talking about housing later on down the list, but it's important that as we're creating these conservation districts, if that's the direction we decide to go in, that it's not going to be so severely limited to housing that we're just not going to be able to address it all in the master plan. And a lot of people don't like new housing being built near them. That's just a fact. And so there has to be some mechanism where we can continue to do that. Despite, communities saying, well, we're a conservation district, so you can't do it.
I mean, do you think it's a comment regarding this particular goal, or do you think it's something that actually should be added as another specific goal in and of itself? I'm sorry, another action as in and of itself.
I mean, create, I mean, we all know that Baltimore County has a housing problem. So, you know, it's, I don't know that it necessarily needs, I believe that there probably already is a goal that's, you know, geared toward creating new housing, that the new housing that's required. You know, I don't think that creating a conservation district is necessarily a bad idea. It's just, it's got to be structured as a secondary or as a lower priority than creating the housing stock that the county pretty desperately needs.
Okay. All right, thank you. Anyone else on any of the actions?
Hi, this is Kimberly Shorter. I wanted to address a couple of the items. I'm in the Woodlawn security community, and of particular interest to me is goal 3 to create overlay districts. I'm definitely in support of that because I do see the potential for walkability in our communities in the immediate vicinity. And in fact, I've been a resident of my community for almost 20 years. And once upon a time when Security Square Mall was Security Square Mall, I used to walk to the mall. So it'd be interesting to see how this particular goal develops.
Okay.
So I'm all for that one. Goal 7, support and provide resources for adaptive reuse of buildings rather than demolition. I have some mixed feelings about that, some reservations, particularly in our community. We have 2 buildings that have been standing vacant for almost 20 years. So my concern is, how are you going to determine if a building has the ability to be reused, or is it just going to sit until you find an opportunity to reuse it? So I understand the need for it, but I'm concerned because there are examples of buildings sitting vacant in this part of the county that don't have any reuse opportunity. And I was relieved to find out that 11 included a typo. Vulnerability instead of viability. My heart sunk when you read viability. So
sorry about that. We did make the other breakout groups aware of that typo. So
yeah, that would be helpful for for those of us who are a little concerned. So I'm very interested in seeing how that goal kind of shapes up and develops.
Okay. Let's see. I had one question for you. I know, when you were talking about the vacant buildings, concerned that they sit vacant for too long, are those buildings primarily residential or commercial?
All commercial.
All commercial, okay. So that, Crystal, is under 7. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else have comments on any of the goals or discussion? Any actions that you think are needed that are not there, you don't see?
Just wanted to show support again for number 3. I'm also very excited about 15-minute community nodes.
Hi, this is Rebecca. I also agree a walkable environment would be fantastic. But I'm also looking at number 9. I think that the examining resilience and developing a resilience plan is quite important. I think we've all seen the flooding. Flooding is probably in our area the most relevant example. We see it in Towson, we see it in Ellicott City. So I do think that that is very important to address. Certainly nature-based planning as well is something I think we could all do a better job at integrating into plans.
That's up at number 4, Crystal.
Sorry, that's number 4.
So incorporate into master plan. Are you talking about master plan and community plans?
Yes, and I was also kind of thinking a little bit about the in general in specific building projects.
Okay, and so in the development review that the county does.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I would also just like to show support in understanding the previous comments regarding adaptive reuse. I do think that we should encourage developers to look at these existing commercial buildings and I think the county has to help incentivize the use of these buildings.
Yes, that's kind of what we were referring to for goal number 1, which is to these community enhancement areas are, again, they are a redevelopment strategy that's in the current master plan. However, there are no really regulations or incentives, either programmatic or financial, that go along with them. So we would like to, develop a new framework that looks at, many of the same characteristics, which was creating redevelopment along these underutilized corridors where these big shopping centers were, but aligning that development with resources, again, maybe through some kind of special overlay district, or through a special designation that would align them with programmatic and financial resources.
Okay, well then I agree with number 1 as well.
Okay.
That makes a lot of sense. I think increasing density will help to accomplish a lot of these goals, and especially when we get down to transportation.
Mm-hmm.
That's about it for me.
Okay.
Thank you.
So Chris,
Hi, this is Bill Robinson, and I wanted to chime in support of number 7 as well. I would love to see maybe, I don't know, not necessarily language, but sort of a focus here on assisting maybe smaller and mid-size organizations that might want to be able to take part in, like public-private partnerships and things that might allow those groups to be able to take advantage of this as well. So I would hope that would be a part of the plan.
good, thank you. Anyone else on the altering the CZMP cycle? I thought that would be the most talked about, but.
Can you say a little bit more about the rationale, or what's the
Yeah,
how
I mean,
it'll affect development and that sort of thing?
It's really to align it with, the policy objectives and the goals in the master plan. So we're not just looking piece by piece at each, zoning request, but we're looking at a policy direction when we evaluate them. And I guess it also takes it, if you get out of the 4 years, it takes it out of the political process as well.
Lori, I apologize. This is Dave Conrad with the Essex Middle River Civic Council. I came in a little late to the breakout session, but I can speak a little bit to, we made the recommendation to the county, or we requested that they include some changes to the CMP cycle. That's one of the reasons I believe it was at least considered for the draft. So one of the things, and I apologize if this was already mentioned, you can just cut me off, but one of the things, having the CZMP cycle, the master plan, the CZMP, and the water and sewer kind of follow in a more well thought out way, whereas the master plan would come first. We would put some things in place for the county we'd like to see over the next several years. Then the CZMP would follow that, and the zoning would hopefully be reflected based on what the decisions that were made in the CZMP. And then, of course, since the water and sewer is done on an annual basis, the water and sewer would just follow to reflect some of the zoning changes that were put in place. In the last CZMP that we had, the CZMP came just before, we just finished the CZMP just before the master plan. So that kind of took things out of whack a little bit. You know, that's not anybody's fault. That's just how it lays out when, you know, because the cycles aren't even with each other in terms of just the timing of it. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe some of the things, the CZMP and the master plan, some of it would have to be changed legislatively because it's connected in with the way that things are done in the county government. And then other things we have some ability to change. So if we could get the CZMP to cycle more along with the master plan, so that, you know, we're you know, I think it would allow us to utilize the planning department more fully and kind of lean on them to kind of make some decisions and suggestions, vet some of these ideas for development and rezoning, and then, you know, give both the county and the planning staff a little better, I guess, start going into the CZMP process, if that makes sense. That's one of the reasons why the Civic Council was in support of it, and one of the reasons we asked that we look into this, if it was possible for the upcoming 2030 master plan.
No, yes, we definitely we've heard from that, you know, consistently from your organization for a while, that we really need the processes coordinated so that one informs the next one. I know that you also had a recommendation that came out of your organization to evaluate and update the PUD process. Can you also give me a little bit of the background on that?
Yeah, so because land use was obviously a part of the discussion for this session, we just wanted to take an opportunity to try to, you know, put some things in place to, again, have the 2030 master plan address, just like you would put into the draft, you know, good land use practice moving forward. So we've seen with the PUD process, you know, over time, the PUD process has kind of changed, maybe from what its initial intention was to how it's used now, and maybe that's okay. But we were looking to see a review of the PUD process, and not necessarily in the master plan, but basically looking at how the PUD process is used now and what its intention is and what we think are the best use of that process in the county. Currently, I know there's some they've promised in the county council. David Marks has wanted to put something forward to address this and look at it, you know, a little closer. So I think from our side of things, just from and this is more of a local issue for the Civic Council, but I would imagine most people in the county could probably relate to it as well. You know, there's less and less land available for development. So, you know, determining how we use our land that's left over, whether we want to preserve it all, whether we want to develop some of it, you know, I think the PUD process kind of falls in there, and it gives the county council a pretty broad range of control over the process, and just making sure that that's, you know, we preserve the input, the community input side of that, I think is important. You know, it's kind of drifted away, I think, from its original intention. I think it would be nice to just do a review of it, and if everybody thinks that it's great and it doesn't need any changes, fine. And if it does, then I think that, you know, there's an opportunity to do that. You know, again, all these land use issues, the 2030 or the CZMP process, just a general increase. You know, we suggested an increase in the role and function of the planning department. It used to be that most things, anything, you know, tied to zoning or land use changes, would be submitted first to the planning staff for recommendation, be vetted, and then sent over to the county council. My understanding is that, you know, if that got too slow or cumbersome and the planning staff wasn't able to, you know, take all of that, you know, it kind of got changed maybe 10 years or so ago where that wasn't required. And now things tend to kind of skip over the planning staff sometimes and just go straight to the council. So, you know, we'd like to see an increased role for the planning department. We'd like to find a permanent solution for the CZMP and work with the county for the water and sewer plan. And, you know, again, with land use, the PUDs as well, I think that kind of falls into, you know, something that plays a pretty critical role in, you know, how things will look in the next 10 years in terms of how things are developed in the area.
Great, thank you. We're about to move into the housing section, unless anyone has any more about the goals that we were.
This is Rebecca. I was wondering, there's no mention of green building standards or high performance building standards, rating systems, et cetera. Had that come into the conversation?
Yes, it has, but certainly it should be added as a distinct action. So, Crystal, you want to add that as number 12? Would you like to word it for us? The way
Establish green building standards appropriate to county development.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else want to add anything before we move on?
I would add a section to number 12 about incentivizing, you know, creating incentives.
Okay, great. Thank you. All righty, let's move on to the housing section. Okay, so for housing, the goal is to strengthen neighborhoods by providing quality housing that is accessible, affordable, and sustainable to meet the needs of the county's diverse population. Where the actions are to implement an inclusionary housing plan to provide a wider range of housing opportunities, analyze the need for zoning changes and/or incentives to support mixed income housing development within a quarter mile of a transit stop, allow housing development in commercial zones in opportunity areas, establish community real estate investment trusts or another land trust to lower the barrier for home ownership, bolster and increase programs and initiatives to assist seniors to age in place, reduce zoning barriers to increase the creation of mixed use and mixed income housing, establish place-based strategies to improve and enhance the housing stock in older communities, and establish incentives to increase home ownership in areas experiencing disinvestment and or where there is greater socioeconomic, we got it right this time, vulnerability. So not viability, vulnerability. So I guess we'll start with the goal. Does anyone want to comment on the goal? Generally agree with it? Think it's missing anything?
I wonder if, this is Rebecca again. I wonder if there is something about not just housing, but an outdoor environment. And I guess I'm mostly thinking of low income or mixed income housing, to be sure that part of that goal is to connect, to have some connection with nature. I'm mostly thinking of kids.
Okay.
Living in multi-family high rises and things like that. So I just think that's important. It's not just the house, but kind of the general outdoor environment as well.
Okay. We might include that as an action item also to make sure that when we're working on these strategies for redevelopment, that they do have a connection to nature and open space. And it may also be something, I'm sure it's something that the work group that's doing harmony in nature is also considering. So thank you for that. Anyone else on any of the actions?
So some more information about what number 3 means by opportunity areas.
Oh, sure. So the county is under a legal agreement to provide affordable housing units in areas that have been designated opportunity areas. And they are areas that were mapped out and they have certain socioeconomic indicators. They're basically the areas of the county that currently have a low amount of affordable housing, but they have high performing school in the area, access to transportation. So they provide benefits for families that may need affordable housing in the future.
Okay.
These federal opportunity zones?
No,
Yeah,
no,
it's
these are not opportunity zones, something different.
Hey, Laurie and Chris, this
So-
is Wally. Can we go back to the goal for a second?
Sure.
Could I go back to my question for a moment,
I'm sorry.
please? So given that that's the answer for number 3, I would just like to tie that to number 2 a little bit. I live in an area where there's recently been a big community uproar about some development in commercial areas that was being tried to be developed as higher density housing than would normally be allowed in this general area. And so I'm very concerned about the concept of increasing the density in these areas that would be far above what is in the surrounding neighborhood to meet that requirement in 2 and 3. So I'm not sure that those 2 things are generally going to be acceptable to some communities.
Okay. So is your main concern about the increase in density? Did we capture that correctly?
Well, that's true, but also the one that talks about something having to do with changing the zoning to provide housing development in commercial zones, which is in number 3.
Okay.
Both of those things were what happened here, or tried to be what happened here recently.
Lori, could I jump in with something, or I don't want to? If Wally's still got something to say, I don't want to jump over him either.
Dave,
We'll let Wally go next.
Dave, I think
Wally.
I got in late. I got in late just like you.
Breakout group.
Yeah, well, I just got here a little bit before you. Yeah, I guess the goal, I just wanted that goal to be a little stronger. I think when it says strengthen neighborhoods, which we all want, that's a lot of stuff. Could be attributed or described or by that. I mean, I think aren't we really saying we want to provide quality housing that's accessible and affordable to meet the needs of the county's diverse? I mean, straight out say it, right? You know, instead of, I think the strength in neighborhoods kind of takes away from the impact of saying provide quality housing, accessible and affordable to the needs of the county's diverse population, which is a really important goal.
Okay, what other folks think about that?
This is Kimberly Shorter. I wholeheartedly agree with Wally's comment.
Yeah, it's much stronger that way.
Okay, so we're just
I'm just not sure the bullet points below actually support that goal.
okay. Well, let's just make the comment that the goal needs to be strengthened by deleting the neighborhoods and just have the goal be provide quality housing that is accessible, affordable, and sustainable. Okay, now we can get to, did other folks have issues with the revised goal and how it relates to the actions?
Can I add something into the one of the actions, Lori?
Sure.
Yeah, so one of the things that we had put forward in the stuff we submitted to you guys early on in the process was we wanted to see create some additional CMDP policy or concept from the Comprehensive Manual of Development Policies that the county uses. So basically, you know, the standards that the county kind of goes to when they're putting things together. I think this speaks to some of the other contributors that have commented in terms of the quality of whether we're talking about, you know, the rehabbed, you know, shopping centers, or whether we're talking about the types of housing that we're putting in. That comprehensive manual of development policies can be helpful in, you know, determining everything from the quality of homes, the size of them, the density, and also to the other person's point about having some, you know, green space, outdoor or space, you know, surrounding. All that kind of falls into that. So, you know, I'd like to see that added into the actions. Just having, you know, create some CMDP guidelines for new development improvements of, you know, these targeted areas that we're looking at, so that we can, and that's something that the Civic Council is already kind of working on for our area, but I think it's something that could be easily taken up by local community organizations, you know, that are more, you know, kind of have their finger on the pulse of their area, what they'd like to see, to kind of see some of those guidelines strategically kind of applied for them. The other thing that we put in there as well, that I'd like to see added if we can, you know, to your point about looking at the inclusionary housing, trying to get you know, this mixed use housing put in throughout the county and getting these areas to some of the better schools and things like that. You know, currently we've talked about how the identify kind of the disproportionate disbursement of subsidized housing in Baltimore County in general, and then explore and propose initiatives to evenly distribute housing voucher opportunities throughout the county. I don't think there's any reason why we should have, you know, subsidized housing, you know, centralized in any, you know, one area. I think that's something that should be, you know, evenly distributed throughout the county, and you know, that provides, you know, kind of ties in with some of these goals and other points and actions that you already have above.
Okay, thank you. I just want to clarify that that would be outside of the legal agreement that we are under right now. That it's kind of a separate issue, because we are required by law to locate these units that are part of the legislation. They have to be in opportunity areas. So,
Okay.
and again,
Well,
we have this map.
Maybe that's something that come up through one of the other sessions. So I wasn't sure if it applied specifically to this, but it again, since we were talking about some you know, some housing, that's
No, thank you.
right.
No, I think that's a good point.
I was going to say about the overall goal that while I appreciate the idea of just focusing on the housing units, I think the context of those units is also important, and the neighborhood context, and that's part of why the county is in this situation with needing a legal agreement, is because some of our older neighborhoods have this concentration of poverty, and that's part of why advocates threaten to sue. And so if you don't think about the concentration of units or opportunities to create mixed use, you're kind of, you may be reproducing the same issue as an unintended consequence. I'm not saying that that's the goal, that's the point of this goal. I'm just saying that thinking about the context and thinking about that, you know, throughout, there should be a diversity of housing types,
okay,
and levels of affordability, to my mind, throughout the county. Maybe not, you know, perfectly evenly distributed, because Parkton and Dundalk are unlikely to have the exact same situation ever, and that's okay. I get that, but the idea of choices throughout the county.
Great, thank you, Amy. We might go up and just include some of the language Amy just did, Crystal, under the goal, about kind of the contribution of the housing to the community and the relationship.
To sort of follow up on Amy, but a slightly different, I think one of the ways that it seems like other jurisdictions are accomplishing that, and we in Baltimore County are struggling, it's through creating, I think they often call it a housing land trust. I mean, you have a real estate investment trust, but I think that's something different. But I think like even Vermont for 30 years has this housing land trust that works between the government and the communities to really make housing happen. Because I think we too often see the attempt to get affordable housing get stuck in the hearing processes, in the development process, and the land, getting the county kind of one step removed and having a private land trust take on that effort, seems to work in other communities. So I think we ought to at least investigate that. It's a little different. Yeah, it's a little different than the community investment trust. And maybe that's what you guys were trying to get to.
There are a number of strategies that are in the affordable housing work groups report. That's I think still technically maybe a draft, but maybe referring to that report in this goal area might make sense.
Yes, we originally had that as the #1 goal, to implement the recommendations that came out of that work group. But I understand that they are not, they're still in a draft form and still being reviewed. So, but we tried to cover it in the, a lot of what we thought the group was working on in the actions, and particularly in the inclusionary housing area. So yeah, I think number 12 is good. That's different than number 4. Where is it? Number 4, yeah. Number 4 was an idea of one of our staff persons who worked in another jurisdiction, where there was a community investment trust where folks who were renters in the area paid into a trust to kind of establish themselves and ready themselves for home ownership opportunity as that became available. So a little bit different.
One other thing is this wouldn't accessory dwelling units also help? That if if it was permitted perhaps by just use permit in the lower DR zones, provide more opportunities for kind of rentals, and without necessarily having DR1 converted to DR2, which can result in a lot of loss of in more impervious surfaces and more houses. But so, okay, good, thanks.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Down in number 9, if we could add some wording about recreation. A number of the other counties have much more organized, developed recreational locations, not just open space, but recreational places. Also, Anne Arundel County seems to have that too, where the recreational opportunities are not necessarily just tied to the, say, school facilities.
I also think that's pretty important. I love how Columbia has a lot of like bike paths and walking paths connecting different parts of different neighborhoods together, and how some of Anne Arundel County's trails are connected to different neighborhoods as well.
There's also in those areas, like tennis opportunities and skateboard opportunities that are all tied together along those locations, and picnic locations with barbecues and that kind of opportunities.
Yeah, those kind of things make homes and regions more valuable. If you have those opportunities in a area that's generally kind of lower income, or housing market's not that hot right now, this could help revitalize that area.
You might be able to tie it into the Greenway plan. Where I live, that goes up through our community, but there's really no place to stop and enjoy. There's just a bike route that goes through a lot of commercial area.
Okay, you want to add that to number 9, Crystal?
I'm sorry if someone already said this, but it does sound like what we're talking about here is establishing a green network akin to sort of what was established in Howard County that makes the most of our hubs and is able to connect neighborhoods as well.
Yeah, I think some of the things that you're getting into now are actually, I mean, they are germane to housing, but I think they actually are relevant to the section we just went over, to the land use and development. And they'll probably be crossover with some of the groups that are looking at open space and nature too. So we have a lot of relationships, but maybe in this one, Crystal, we can put a parenthesis and put also land use and development, so we know to tie back to that. Okay. Anyone else? How about anything on number 5, number 6, number 7?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay.
A thought I had about number 5, someone actually, I think, may have just kind of covered my concern on with Action 13. For me, I see an opportunity, or my personal needs and folks I know, anecdotally, they're gonna really benefit from, in-law suites in their homes or on their properties. So, not everyone can necessarily live in their home forever, but some sort of in-law suite opportunity or make that legal to build in certain zones would be really awesome.
Good. The place-based strategies in number 7 was our thought about how, while we're busy trying to create affordable units and opportunity areas, we don't want to ignore the areas that are our older communities that have throughout the years already had affordable housing stock, and what can we do to improve and enhance that older housing stock.
So there's more you could say about vacant housing in this
These apartments.
whole section.
Okay.
I mean, to the extent we've had specific bullets about accessible dwelling, that kind of thing. You could, there are strategies used in other jurisdictions around using receivership to bring troubled vacant properties to sale, to move them to redevelopment. Things, there are a lot of very specific strategies that could be pursued, but I think a statement about, the county has escalating rates of vacant housing, just like we have escalating rates of poverty. And thinking about how to proactively address vacant housing, move beyond perhaps the fear of what happened with Senate Bill 509 and kind of how all of that was handled, and think about some other strategies that are much more targeted toward really addressing nuisance properties that bring down the value of surrounding homes. I think is something the county needs to look at for the coming decade.
Are you talking about like an acquisition strategy, or?
Well, like in the city, in Baltimore City, they use a receivership process where a separate legal entity that's not the city. There are laws in place so that the county could declare a property vacant. And what that means is that it's not inhabited, it's in horrible shape, nobody's doing anything. The property owner has a specific period of time to try and do something, because not only are they, you can choose to let your own property go to crap, but when it's affecting the entire surrounding area, it's like you shouldn't have the right to do that. And so it's a process that conveys the property to sale. So it's different from the jurisdiction itself condemning a property for redevelopment. It's not that process, and it keeps it out of, it's not that this county would not acquire the property, but it conveys it so that somebody else can buy it and do something with it within a period of time.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I think that's good. Do we want to add that as a separate goal, or do you think it's pretty related to number 7?
I think it's separate. I think 7 to
I
me,
think
or
it's
it
a
could be
separate,
the same. But
I
yeah,
think it's a
7 to
separate
me
specific
would
thing.
be like, and maybe, Amy, maybe you know the more term. What's the program in the city? It's like Made You Look or something. It's a wonderful program where the people are working with the community to do artwork and, you know, do different things to buildings to pull people together to show off what they have and just get more pride in the community. I mean, I wish I knew the name of that program, but it really is cool. And to me, that's the kind of place-based strategies is make it look better, make it look neater, get parks, get gardens, and just have people feel better about their community. Of course, dress crime, obviously, that's a tough one, but
Yeah, I think,
yeah, Made You Look, great. Yeah, that's it.
I
It's out of
think,
Micah, I think, Wally.
Pardon me?
I think Micah runs that, the Maryland.
Yeah, yeah, it's fabulous.
I think programs like that, things around spruce up and beautification are definitely important. I think, you know, there are many, many other kinds of place-based initiatives and, you know, programs to help spur redevelopment, renovation of homes, et cetera. So, but yeah, the vacant housing thing, I would maybe make that a separate action.
How about I think we're going to get sent back to our main lobby soon, but does anybody have any last words? I thought one thing that I thought of is code enforcement. That hasn't been
Oh, yeah.
Something I would like to see, or at least the county maybe should think about, would be working on creating some sort of housing topology like they have in the city, so that you can really be able to identify which neighborhoods are most vulnerable and sort of use them as your own sort of reference guide for where to target investment. And in a similar fashion, there is a lot. Baltimore, I know that a few years ago, I don't know if it's still in existence, there was a Live Near Your Work program with Northwest Hospital. And one of the things that, and within a certain radius, I think the county was going to put money towards where people could purchase homes, put money towards encouraging people to live near I think particularly Northwest Hospital. And but then within that radius, there were certain neighborhoods that were explicitly targeted because with additional financial incentives, because they had either they'd been hit by the foreclosure crisis, or there was just a feeling that these were vulnerable communities. And I know my neighborhood, Colonial Village, was one of them. However, I don't think the neighborhood association really knew about it. And so I think it's important that these incentives be just communicated that they're there and that people can use them. I also want to really give a strong support for 2 and 3. I think they are good things, and I think both not just for in terms of economic diversity and quite frankly racial diversity, which are important, but I think also they will improve the quality of life for folks living in those communities. I know that there's been resistance to it. One thing the county might want to look at is perhaps doing it on a corridor-like basis, because I think just saying well, we're just going to put big buildings here, I think that can turn people off. I think it just perhaps showing to the community, engaging in some sort of process whereby people can really see what's possible. That may change minds.
And so I think what that gets back to is just reevaluating the PUD process and maybe including a PUD task force, because that's our primary way of doing mixed development.
Okay.
So I might just add to what was being said. You know, it's not so much that the type of development is necessarily the problem, but that the infrastructure, the storm drains, the sewers, and all of that in the schools are simply not conducive to increasing the density in those locations so close to these transit corridors.
Okay, so that could go in number 2 and 3.
So Lori, just want to let you know everybody is back to the main lobby.
Okay, you can bring us back.
It's all back.
Okay, how do we get back? Okay.
You're already here. We're here.
So now I think that Lori, we would like the other facilitator from different breakout section to do the report for their breakout section.
Yes, thank you all very much. I think Amy Mante's group is going to go first.
All right, hang on one second. I'm having a little technical issue. Computer does not like me right now. All right, let me pull this up. Okay. All right, I'll zoom in. Hopefully you guys can see. All right, so I'll try to go quickly. In my group, we of course touched on both of these goals and most, maybe not all, of the actions for both. There were some times where, you know, kind of the housing popped up in the land use and development and the land use and development and the housing piece, that there might be a few pieces that are not in the right spot. I was trying to fix those real quickly. In response to the goal about elevating the quantity or the quality of the built environment to ensure equitable, sustainable, and a prosperous place for all citizens to thrive, ideas for additional actions. I think everyone was okay with that goal. Ideas for additional actions or kind of improving some of the ideas of actions we threw out were that areas for development and redevelopment need to be guided by the master plan. There should be a focus on redevelopment inside the Beltway. Maintain the character of the rural area by enforcing the URDL and the RC zones. Look at higher density redevelopment, specifically residential. Some concerns about sewer spills. How can they be prevented? Kind of the impact on infrastructure from development. Better warnings when spills happen, and infrastructure overall needs to be addressed if there's going to be a population increase in the county, and we're going to push for higher density development. Property owners with long-term vacancies in shopping centers, and sometimes they have spaces that really aren't quite up to par. They're still being rented to businesses. How can those be addressed? When we talk about redeveloping shopping centers, we had comments about the PUD process being broken. Tidal flooding caused by overdevelopment. Again, the sewer system improvements prior to new development. Address vacant homes and making improvements to those to sell and provide housing without adding to new development. More housing types and options for seniors in the communities that they live in, that they may not be able to stay in their house, but where they go next, should be within their community or have the opportunity to do that. Flexibility and uses for redevelopment. Mechanisms for redevelopment that isn't just the PUD process, something that would better promote redevelopment. CZMP, there were some concerns that extending the cycle timeline could result in multiple piecemeal rezonings kind of in between the 10 years via county council, and that could result in more spot zoning. Concerns about councilmatic courtesy during the zoning process. Influence from only one voice determining zoning changes that have a countywide impact often. And all councils should have input with those, and more community input in the rezoning process overall. Developers should pay for improvements to infrastructure and new development. Maybe look at a fee scale for the development impact fees so that it would encourage development more in some areas than others, and no waiver of community input meetings on any development, especially PUD. So for the housing goal, strengthening neighborhood by providing quality housing. Some of the ideas we had, there was a long discussion about accessory dwelling units, allowing them by right to provide additional affordable housing. One of the examples that was given that was local was Montgomery County. There were some concerns within the group about the by right option, kind of the impacts it has to communities where it would appear. Parking issues in those communities, increased burden on infrastructure, how would that be managed or regulated if a process, or if these were allowed, especially if they're allowed by right. How do you deal with areas where they currently exist illegally because there isn't a process to create them currently, and that they do provide a housing option for aging in place that seems to be popular right now. There's a suggestion to review single-family zoning to allow for a greater variety of residential unit type, and that would further affordable housing goals. Programs, increased programs for interior renovations to homes to allow people to age in place. Impacts to housing in Baltimore County because of poor housing and high property taxes in Baltimore City. So how do we anticipate that or prepare for that? Affordable housing education is needed for the public from the county, what it means, what it doesn't mean. More incentives for transit-oriented development to decrease car use. Also tied to that, live where you work incentives, also to that same goal. And consideration for the location of new and proposed affordable housing and the impact on the existing area's traffic and infrastructure. So that's the report from our group.
Thank you. I think David's next.
Yes, I am. I'll hop on. Okay. So I'll go quickly through this like Amy. Like Amy said, we bounce back and forth quite a bit, and my group as well. But I just really quickly want to thank everyone who was able to engage with us. It was great having a nice discussion with everybody. So with the land use and development, we really kind of talked quite a bit about having an honest and open process. Goodness, apologies. So the county needs to hire better negotiators, get better design considerations during the PUD process. The PUD process is also difficult from the developers end. The council members have full authority, and developers are tasked with politically convincing folks. That was a fun discussion. They should be a tool for better communities. CZMP process doesn't include the PUDs, and the community doesn't really have any time to study them. And then PUDs are no good for the community. It needs to be more like the CZMP. We need higher density communities that will allow for types for all types of these nodal community developments. If we properly recognize the constraints of the sewage system, we would end up blocking all developments. So we have to really take a real consideration of what the actual status of the sewage system is and what sorts of notifications the county has already received in that consideration development. So Baltimore County is known for running the CZMP every 4 years, and it's really just being called a giveaway to developers. Other municipalities are doing this differently, and we may see that updating to be in line with the master plan will allow for more community-oriented processes. Thinking a bit about more the CZMP process is incredibly resource intensive for communities. They can't do this every 4 years. We had a whole lot of discussion about that. And if 10 years isn't the right length, maybe it's 4 years. I'm just going to mute myself quickly. So CZMP process does allow for areas like Towson to get redeveloped pretty readily. So that is a benefit we should look to maintain. And then, of course, that there's not a lot of land left inside the Erdl that is ready for this suburban development. So that kind of high intensity is perhaps best served by the CZMP, or that need for high intensity is best served by the CZMP process. Supporting community associations are the best ones that know which buildings are going to be readily usable for adaptive reuse. So maybe we can teach community associations which kinds of buildings we could do this with. The conservation districts, so we kind of talked about this a little bit at the end, but just making sure we're not latching onto the past in pursuit of the future, I thought was a nice phrase. And then, of course, we had some back and forth between folks in older communities and folks in newer communities. So it was a nice discussion there as well. With the climate change, parts of Essex and Dundalk are sinking within Bay. I enjoyed someone said that North Point's dirt is becoming more like pudding. Older houses may have already been risen or elevated, but some houses will be severely damaged by sea level rise. And then, of course, we can do what we can to mitigate sea level impacts. With the small area plans, the main focus here was if we are going to develop these plans, we need strict implementation on these. We can't just have everyone sitting on endless Zoom calls for the next 4 or 5 years and then write a plan and then not do anything with it. It can't just end up on the shelf, was the phrase that was used. And then lastly, again, partnering with the community associations near these, even identifying these older shopping centers, figure out which ones to prioritize, would be really great for the community. We actually had 3 suggested goals or additional actions. So this kind of one, a little vague, but the lack of trust that is the county is effectively keeping up with the needs of the growing population. How are we going to make sure the county holds its promises when they are saying that these new developments are going to be attached to improvements in services such as parks, sewage, and schools? One thing that was noticed was there's not much about the ERDL in these actions, and just maintaining the ERDL for the foreseeable future, of course, or into the future, was a goal on the 2020 plan, and how can we make sure it's a goal in the 2030 plan? We should put solar farms and commercial developments, and making sure that we're focusing on that green energy inside the ERDL as well. So I'll jump right down to housing. Similarly, we kind of had talks about what we never used the phrase, but that missing middle housing between single family residential and then multifamily residential. What's in the middle there? So I'll try to go through it as best I can. Allowing for different types of townhomes as an inclusionary tactic, shrinking the size and regulations, instead of just doing the inclusionary processes of demanding that some developers put more inclusionary, more affordable units in their developments. How do we make sure that we're identifying where these transit stops are actually going to be useful, and not just saying that every bus stop is now a transit node? I thought that was a nice comment as well. Aging in place usually means actually finding affordable services. So maybe the master plan isn't the best technique to do this, but instead we could work with local community associations to help that their older residents have access to these affordable services. And then, expanding resources. There's a growing population in Baltimore County, and the real need is to expand resources to meet the needs of that growth. And then lastly, or I'm sorry, not lastly, but really the affordable housing in Baltimore County, according to our group, is going to be that older housing stock. And what can we do to make sure that those communities are safe, clean, and efficient housing, rather than relying the entirety of our hopes for affordable housing in Baltimore County on new developments. And then lastly, homeownership is a great goal, but it is unattainable for some folks. And you shouldn't have to be a homeowner to get affordable housing in Baltimore County. All right, y'all, that is my entirety. Once again, thank you to my group.
I think Garnet is next.
Thank you. Austin, do you have the Word doc? So we had a great discussion in my there were experts in both land use and development and also in housing. So thank you everybody for your input. So on the first action, they wanted to have more clarity on use of programmatic, but they were not fan of the community enhancement areas nor the transit. So they agree with the first goal. On the second action, so on the second action, they said, so what was the analysis that led to this decision? They wanted to know. They also talked about obtuse and antiquated zoning process. They said that the PUD is intended to be the exception, not the rule, and it meant to be used for Baltimore County underlying zoning. does not work. They talked about public benefit for the PUD, and also there was a question on relation between the master plan and the zoning. We should have master plan and that guides zoning, but that's not currently happening. So not guided by good planning reform. On the third one, talking about the 15-minute community node, they said that using the terms is in vogue, but what is the next new fashion? We are building communities, not development, so there needs to be walkable, mixed use, all of that. How is this applicable in established communities? Same problem with community enhancement areas. It's not just saying something or using a term doesn't make it happen. They also said direct resources and investment toward all the established communities that already fit those descriptions, like for example, walkable. Making a mixed use community has totally changed Towson. That was an example for the better, and that can have a similar impact on certain areas. Also, mixed use does not necessarily work in suburban environment, and identification of those nodes should be critical to this process. The nature-based solution for planning, they said that does this refer to providing increased access to nature, or does this refer to new guidelines for new development, for green space, for trees? They said access to nature and respect to nature. Aligning water and sewer plans, they said it should be consistent with master plan. It's already required by law already anyway, but the implementation is lacking. They said that it's disconnected because water and sewer as currently exist is not a plan at all. It's not proactive. Lack of understanding with this action item. Tip of the iceberg for many other concurrent issues. For the CZMP cycle, they said it's a nightmare if we align it with, change it from 4 to 10 years. They would prefer it to stay at 4 years, and then have the 8 years master plan instead of 10 years. Never done comprehensive, so to do zoning only once every 10 years is problematic, not realistic. Support and provide resources for the adaptive reuse of building. They said that it makes sense to use what's there, more sustainable building. Where are the resources coming from? They wanted to know. And do you reform building codes to make space for adaptive reuse? And also, we should create incentive for developers to build multi-use spaces with public benefit. For the conservation district, they said that we should be tied to previous. This should be tied to previous goals because it just makes sense for those districts. Implement strategies to address the negative impact of climate change. This is too abstract. We should be focusing on measurable goals and like tree canopies or forest loss or low carbon solutions. For the small area plans, they agree because this is key to updating. The key should be updating all the plans on a cyclical way. Create a strategy and plan for the redevelopment of all the shopping. They said that this will happen on a case-by-case basis. However, it's a county-wide issue, and we are running out of developable space. So this type of spaces are where the county should focus development effort. And for the housing topic, implementing an inclusionary housing plan. They said that we should have a percentage unit dedicated for disabled veterans, which will also have affordable housing task force. For the zoning changes for mixed income housing development within a quarter mile, we should refer to high frequency, high capacity service, which excludes a lot of communities. There was also an example of food distribution at the Arbutus Recreation Center. They said that the closest closest transit stop was over a mile away. For the commercial zone in opportunity areas, they said that the opportunity area is not defined, but refer to area designated to receive affordable housing unit. They said that all commercial zones should allow other use, not only in opportunity areas, because we have overzone for commercial development. Residential commercial should be a permitted land use countywide. For the land trust, they thought that the program for public service workers, they needed some type of program for public service workers. For example, the federal government workers, county workers, teachers, EMTs, to have that rent-to-own program. For the increased program and initiative to assist seniors in place, to age in place. They said that we do not have enough places for seniors to be able to stay where they are, where they have raised their families. Talking about specific housing types, design floor plans, for example, the patio homes, the carriage home, where the first floor bedroom, first floor entry garage, this type of housing is popular and opens up opportunities for other population to move in. It shouldn't mean that senior women in the house where they have raised their children. For the reducing the zoning barriers, that's what we have been saying the whole time. So there should be lot size are a barrier. For example, they gave an example in Vancouver, and then they said Baltimore County just eliminated all the single family housing as a way to let the market decide. For the place-based strategies, they said that this won't happen by changing a single law or a rule. And then for the increased home ownership in areas experiencing disinvestment, they said that this is so important. But they were surprised that there were no more push for first-time home ownership in low-income communities or subsidized program needed to make this happen where it's most needed. And I believe there was some, action that were added or some ideas. I think if you scroll, down. So they wanted to see the, high rise in suburbia, like no more than 5 to 8 stories. It's a housing crisis. We have to densify small lots, duplexes, that they don't necessarily refer to high rises. So these are like topics or ideas that we should be thinking about and see how we can add them into the land use action. They also said that land use in Baltimore County is not dedicated to supporting families in housing crisis situations. So to think about that also. Baltimore County has no structure to address public facilities, whether they are densified or not, and that the density is consistent with smart growth, but we need to focus more on the baseline services. And they will also talk about greenfield development. It's a long-standing issue, and we need to be getting some type of actions to cover those issues. So that's all I have for my group.
All right, I'll get started then. So thanks to my group, I think we brought up a lot of important points. So for the first goal for land use and development, overall, everyone agreed that there's no real changes that are needed with that goal specifically, but they would just like to see that executed. So for the action items, they for the first one, they did not see a follow-up from the county regarding open space, so no major issues with the community enhancement areas specification, clarification provided as reason for action. So specifically with community enhancement areas, It wasn't really a transparent process. It wasn't followed up on and didn't have much teeth. So in general, they liked the idea, but in a version that is more actionable and will provide the benefits to the community that are needed. That's needed. Number two would be the need for transparency in the process, specifically looking at financial implications so that community members are not able to support what value is being created for each community. So understanding what the implications of certain developments are and whether that's advancing the community positively or if that's contributing to disorderly development that's going to hinder the community. Number two, also, so to develop decisions that should be made with consideration of long-term impact and walkability. So addressing a development holistically with considerations to nearby uses, nearby areas. How do we ensure that developers deliver on what has been promised? An example was raised about a development that came in, promised open space and trails and would be open to the public, and then down the road they gated it off and it's just a private park now. So improving trust and transparency and accountability, and then also being holistic with our views. So not just site specific, but understanding how a development will impact many aspects of the community outside of that area. Also, development should consider school capacity in that same spirit. So understanding the implications of development in a holistic view. Development should occur without fully understanding development trends. Shouldn't occur, excuse me, without fully understanding development trends. Development should not occur in a silo. And then for the 10th point, the master plan to reference specific community development plans to be able to retain their identity. So not just wide umbrella view of the county as a whole, but improving community identity through development. Ensuring that plans are able to be enforced, to have teeth, and are complementary to the master plan. A desire to focus development on Security Square Mall, looking at regulations that may negatively impact development of various areas in a way that addresses localized issues. So looking at the positives of a community, of a development and creating a win-win scenario. Infill development on an underutilized site. So incentivizing infill where it's not productive on a current site, rather than pushing more development out where it shouldn't be, where there's not existing infrastructure. Considerations for what has occurred in areas, not one size fits all model to allow local specific development. And then specifically for District 1, the DR16 and DR10 zoning, so higher density residential, that's seen as a value for the tax base because it costs less per resident in those dense neighborhoods from a tax perspective. So how can we better invest in those neighborhoods to make them more attractive for people to want to stay there and invest in, and encourage other types of public funding in those areas as well through TIFs or other uses. So for additional actions to include in land use and development, look at business communities. So not just commercial type uses, but also encouraging light and heavy manufacturing areas, that we don't forget about those uses as vital for the workforce and for our economy, so that we don't disregard those zones through our rezoning process. And that is all for the land use section. We'll move on to housing. For housing, the members specified that yes, they do agree with the goal, but not at the cost of areas losing their identities. So being smart about that goal and not applying it the same way across the board. Focusing on mixed use, mixed income housing. So housing that's affordable across a spectrum of income levels and not just focusing on very low incomes or median incomes, but focusing on the whole spectrum of housing and making sure that housing is affordable at different options for different incomes. And then we shouldn't confuse density with affordable housing. So when we're, for instance, the PUD process, if we provide more dense housing, it doesn't always equate to affordable housing. It could still be inexpensive housing unit for a low-income family. So how we're being smart about zoning and density, but not using it just for affordability, but other aspects. So generally, the items that the group has additional ideas for action items for the 7th item, making investment in communities in the DR 10.5 zoning to install confidence in locations. So similar to the previous point, improving housing stock within the denser neighborhoods, increasing confidence for people in that area to invest, a TIF and other uses in that area that need them. Number 6, community will need to know the value that is being created for landowners and developers. This will foster buy-in from the community. So again, transparency and creating a value for the community and not just a loss. And understanding that all the value is not going just to the developer and the homeowners on that site, but also the community will come away with benefits. 4 and 8, create opportunities for home ownership through partnerships, leveraging nonprofits like Dundalk Renaissance Corps was referenced. Must create scenarios where communities and developers' needs are understood while still producing affordable housing options. So creating that balance, not only housing affordability, but transportation affordability and accessibility. So increasing bikeability, walkability as a form of transit and not just recreation, and increasing options for mobility without the need for car ownership. And looking at ADU, accessory dwelling unit legislation, so a form of gentle density, and that's what we talked about a lot, was not one big project in a community to solve all the problems, but instead incremental small growth that will push the needle, and ADUs is one form of that. And then considering form-based zoning, so having multifamily housing units where it looks like a single family home. It fits within the context, but it's gentle density that will provide affordable housing in that missy middle housing that we're lacking. And then other actions, improving walkability, bikeability, can assist with other action items here. Part of land use and housing, but encouraging housing growth that is accessible through walking and biking. And that is all. Thanks.
Okay, I think I am up next. Crystal, if you could bring up the. Okay, for land use and development, our group generally supported the goal. They commented on action number 2, that we should review the process, its intentions and best use of the process, preserve community input side of the process, and provide for an increased role in the PUD process for the planning department. For the 15-minute community nodes, we looked at a lot of potential for walkability in communities, and there was general support for that action. Number 4, we should incorporate into all plans and building projects and at the development review level when we're looking at plans. Number 6, we talked about altering the CZMP. Some folks thought this could be problematic because at the end of a very long 10-year period, you would have an overwhelming amount of zoning petitions and possibly PUD applications. The timing all in conjunction would help with development decisions and planning efforts moving forward, but there was kind of mixed thought on this one. Support and provide resource for adaptive reuse. There's concern over buildings that have been sitting vacant for years with no reuse opportunities. So while folks like the idea, they didn't want anything to stand in the way of possibly taking down these old derelict, mostly commercial buildings that had been vacant for years. There was encouragement for developers to look at existing buildings and incentivize the use of these buildings, focusing on assisting smaller and mid-sized groups and nonprofits to take advantage of these resources. Under conservation districts, people had mixed ideas about them. Some saw some unintended consequences as people possibly resisting change in their neighborhood if they were declared a conservation district. It could be damaging to development opportunities. There was a need to acknowledge the character while also allowing for sensitive change, preserve the context of the neighborhood, and have a need to create balance between change and preservation. With strategies for climate change, there was a suggestion for examine a resilience plan, which would be very important to address. Under 11, we should take advantage of mixed use into consideration. Number 12 was an additional item that was added, establish green building standards appropriate to the county development and add incentives. And then in housing, we had some mixed conversation about the goal. Some thought that we should delete the first part of the goal that speaks to strengthening neighborhoods and just state that we should provide quality housing. They felt that was a stronger goal statement. But then some folks came back and talked about the relationship between, strong neighborhoods and strong housing options and the distribution of various types of housing within a community to ensure its strength. So a little bit of a mixed idea on that particular goal. On number 2, there was concern for the increase of density may not be acceptable on communities. Let's see, consider reviewing corridor by corridor. Under allowing commercial zones and opportunity areas, increasing density places a challenge on the schools and the infrastructure. The thought was generally supported. However, they felt that the infrastructure need to be looked at in greater detail. Under bolster and increase programs for the seniors, they talked about the in-law suite opportunities, making it legal in certain zones. Establishing place-based strategies. They wanted to look at a Baltimore City program called Made You Look that addresses kind of some of the social characteristics of the housing, of the neighborhood, in addition to just the housing stock. And they added some additional actions. Number 9 is consider the outdoor environment with mixed income housing and connections with nature and open space, recreation opportunities spread throughout different neighborhoods, things like tennis courts, skateboard, bike paths, and trails, tie in with the greenway and establish a green network. They added edits to the CMDP regarding residential, commercial, green, and open space and guidelines for new development improvements. Number 11 was added, even distribution of housing opportunities and housing types, taking into consideration the neighborhood context, that they should be spread throughout the county. Number 12 was to consider land trust opportunities as a way to create affordable housing and home ownership opportunities. 13, opportunities for rentals and accessory structures in the lower DR zones. 14, think about how to proactively address vacant housing, targeted strategies to address nuisance properties, such as Baltimore City has a receivership program. Number 15 was code enforcement, always something to think about in those strategies. And 16 was perhaps create a housing typology, such as the city has, where you identify vulnerable neighborhoods to direct where investment should be targeted. And I think that's it for our group.
All right, thank you, Laurie, and thank you to everyone who joined us here tonight. I just wanted to point out that, again, this was part 1 of Livable Built Environment. We actually have another meeting this week, tomorrow night, for the resilient economy. And then part 2 for Livable Built Environment is next Monday. And then you can note there's a meeting for a healthy community on the 26th, equity on the 31st, and harmony with nature on the 7th. If you signed up to get our emails, I send those out every week as a reminder. You go to the next slide, sorry. So if you do go to the website, baltimorecounty.md.gov/masterplan2030, there is a survey up for Livable Built Environment, so you can provide additional input if you'd like on the goals and actions. The goals and actions themselves are up if you want to go back and just be able to just read them, you know, kind of as we presented them here tonight. We will post a copy of the meeting recording as soon as we get that pulled out of WebEx and post it online. We'll put a link to it. And we'll also provide a PDF of the slide deck that we used tonight. So I just want to thank you again on behalf of the Department of Planning and the county. If you've got other comments, you know, masterplan@baltimorecounty.md.gov. I check that email, so they'll come to me and I can get those out to the work group leads. And like I said, you know, just keep checking the website. We're posting things as we go through these meetings. And we'd love for you to go take those surveys and provide additional input. So that is all we have for this evening. Thank you all very much, and hopefully we'll see a lot of you again tomorrow night. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
You too.
Thanks.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, John Boy.